In today's episode, I'm talking with Angela Allen, founder of Bags for Strife in the UK. After Angela lost several family and friends to suicide, she and a group of like-minded people banded together to create Bags for Strife. This charity distributes care packs to people bereaved by suicide, with the aim of making people feel less isolated, more understood, and connected to others who've gone through what they're going through. Bags for Strife is the inspiration behind our After Bags project, which is distributing the same kind of bags here in Australia. This is an inspirational story about how wonderful things can be born out of terrible circumstances, and a reminder that simple acts of care and empathy can have massive positive impact. This episode does discuss suicide and complex grief, so please take care while listening. Maybe we could start off by sharing a little bit about the story of Bags for Strife. You know, where did it start? What happened? And how did it come about?
Okay, yeah. So 8-9 years ago, my best friend Jude lost her husband to suicide. And we lived in a very archetypal English village, you know, a really pretty kind of community, close neighbours, you know, the church bells ring every quarter of an hour, free pubs, you know, just a lovely, lovely village where nothing bad ever happens. And then it turns out that bad things happen everywhere. So Dougie took his own life, and we kind of supported the family. And from an external perspective, we're really shocked by the lack of support that they received. And on the back of that, I was working not too far away, running another charity, and I ended up talking to other people and was linked in with kind of suicide prevention stuff with the local government there. And another chap and I set up a peer support group based on the experience that Judith had had with losing her husband, and also recognizing the fact that actually there was nothing locally for people. Tony, a chap called Tony, and I ran this group for probably 18 months. And then suddenly suicide came crashing through my door. So back in 2019, my youngest daughter, Katrina, took her own life completely out of the blue and unexpectedly. And we were obviously overwhelmed by the grief of that. And then 7 months later, my husband, who was Kat's stepdad, also took his own life. So those three incidents, starting with Dougie and then my own daughter and husband, it just, that complete chasm of darkness that hits you post-loss was just incredible, and nothing really there in terms of external support. My family, my friends, all brilliant, but actually the feeling of isolation when you lose somebody to suicide is really incredible. And I hadn't appreciated that, even though I'd run this peer support group. It's only when it happens to you that you realize how lonely a place it is. That's when the concept, the idea for Bags came about, that let's do something that makes people feel less alone and also just gives a helping hand, I suppose. Knowing that there are other people out there who have faced that same journey is really important. And the most important thing I think that we provide is that compassion and love and understanding. And I think that's what the Bags are full of.
That's a beautiful way to kind of frame up what the bags are full of. You know, they're full of those things. They're full of items, of course, but they're representative of care and compassion and empathy and those sorts of things. Yeah. Wow, what an experience to have gone through, Angela. Wave after wave, yeah, full on. And for you, I suppose, outside of your family unit, but then inside really quickly. And a couple of those waves, it's just, yeah, it's there's not often I am a little bit speechless, Angela, but I don't know quite what to say there, except to kind of go, yeah, I understand what you're saying. You know, I can absolutely empathize into that situation. And that there's something about your story as well, that resilience to kind of go, we're not going to just sort of let that happen. We're going to do something. We're actually going to come together and we're going to do something. And turning the experience into something else is pretty amazing too. Tell me about that bit. How did it become a bag? You've got these beautiful bags that you create, these beautiful blue bags. How did it jump from that idea of we want people to be supported and not feel alone to be a bag of things? What was the process there?
So I think the initial idea came when we lost Kat. She died in hospital. And when we were there, a police officer was there, because you get a police officer assigned to you with any loss like that. And he gave me a piece of paper, a little card, and I have no idea what was on that card. I assume it was something to do with support services, but honestly, by the time we drove back from the hospital to home, that I'd lost that card. Don't know what happened to it. And it was that I just thought, if you gave somebody something that they couldn't lose, or that would be really difficult to lose, you'd have to really concentrate on losing a bag, which is, it's not huge, it's not a satchel, but it's definitely a tote bag.
Substantial, yeah.
So something that was bigger than just that piece of paper. So I definitely thought of a bag. But actually, when we reached out to some of Kat's friends to ask them what emotions they felt when they heard about Kat's loss, the words that overwhelmingly came back were blame, anger, guilt, and sadness. And so the acronym for BAGS was born. I think those words really resonate with other people. And I think people kind of question whether blame and guilt were the same. But for me, I definitely feel that those are very different. I think blame is externalizing, is wanting to find something else that made that person do what they did. And the guilt is very internalized. It's all about the things that you could have done differently. So the concept came from my experience at the hospital, and then the bags themselves, in terms of what we put into them, were definitely designed by an army of people. We reached out to lots of different people to say what we should put in there and what we shouldn't put in there. And so now we have, hopefully, things that resonate with people.
I think they absolutely do. I've got your bag and I've seen your bag, and I think they do. And you do a great job of explaining why those things are in there as well, which I think is a unique part of the bag, actually, now I think about it, so that when that bag lands into that situation, into that context, into that family, into that community, there's an explanation about why those items are in there. Yes, it's useful to know why that item's in there, but that gives a glimpse into the experience that the person who has that bag is going through. So when we're trying to support or understand or empathize, it's like, oh, right, that person's probably not drinking water. They're probably forgetting to drink water. That's why there's a water bottle in there. Oh, okay, cool. There's something I could do. There's something I could, give a little nudge or a little reminder, or maybe I could invite them for a cup of tea or something like that. Those items really help with, that bubble around people. Makes so much sense. But I love the idea that, it's this thing you can't lose. It's like, there's your support. That's your bag, that's where this stuff can live, it's a really lovely kind of way to think about that stuff. Yeah. And actually, Catherine Epson here, who sort of co-founded with me after receiving one of your beautiful bags, the Australian version talks about that a lot. She says, that bag went with me kind of everywhere I went. She said, I carried that bag with me everywhere. It just, and it makes so much sense when you explain, that's where it came from, your experience. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, we've had that feedback from others who have just said it's like a talisman. It's kind of an external thing that you carry around that represents your loss. And I know, she's now a steering group member, and she said she literally carried it in every room she went to, when she went to the toilet, when she went to the kitchen. And it was just something that she brought with her as kind of, somebody recognizes what I'm going through. And that was almost enough for her. And I think that's what a lot of people say, that recognition is key.
Yeah, and that, like you were saying before, when you were describing where it kind of came from, that desire to want people to not feel alone in that experience, to feel connected, to to know that there's other people who understand this stuff and who've been in those shoes and who've seen the world that way. I think that ties in really nicely as well. That lands into someone's life and it's actually a big blaring signal that you're not alone. You know, the fact that people have taken the time and the effort to think about that and to put that bag together and create it and craft it and then get it to people, I think there's so much inferred in this simple act of giving that bag of just how much care goes into them. Yeah, when you say it's full of love and care and compassion, it's like, well, yeah, clearly it is. It has to be. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think our little book of help is also something that people really relate to, because you'll know both in your work with the After bag and also as a counsellor that people don't know how to grieve, or that's maybe not the right way to say that, but people grieve so differently.
Yeah.
And we always say there is no right way to grieve. There isn't. But people feel a bit weird about, you know, should I be doing this? Should I be crying all the time? Should I stay in the house? Should I go out? Should I see people? Should I not see people? And actually there's just no right way. And we want to tell people, however you are feeling is justified and right. And don't let anyone feel that what you are doing is abnormal. And I think having the different stories of people in our little book who have lost different people. So there's stories from mothers who have lost children. There's stories from wives and husbands and friends. And hopefully we've got most of society represented in there so that people can look and go, right, they kind of have lost the same person as I have. And I wonder how they've dealt with it. And I just think that is really helpful, knowing that, as I say, however you are coping is the right way for you to cope.
I think we've done a good job at communicating, like at a society level, about grief and how grief works and impacts us. But I think sometimes we've gone a little bit too far in terms of creating, here's models of grief and here's stages of grief. And so they're really easy to grab on to go, oh, okay, you know, the stages of grief, we can get a PDF and look at that and go, like, yeah, but actually everyone's stages are completely different. And I think we bring ourselves undone a little bit when we try and sort of template what things look like. I was going to say better, but a different way to do it is to say, well, look at all these different examples. You know, it's just people do it differently and that's okay. It's really okay. There's a book on my coffee table at the moment. It's published by The Lonely Planet, who make all the travel books, but it's about death and grieving around the world. And they talk about how different cultures and societies and countries have rituals and processes and all of that sort of stuff around grief. And you only need to look at that book to kind of go, yeah, wow, like grief is so different everywhere. And for each of those people in those communities, it's going to be slightly different. But on the flip side, it gives a really nice bunch of ways that you can actually do grief, if that makes sense. Like you kind of go, yeah, that's a ritual we'll create, or that's a little tradition we'll start doing, or those sorts of things that you sort of lift from other people's stories. So by listening to other people and what they've been through, I think we can take so much from that, like on a personal, straight in kind of level. You know, you just kind of go, yeah, that's me on a page. That's how it works for me. Or if you don't know how to do it, it's like, I'm going to do that. You know, that's what I'm going to do. It's a really nice part of your bag, the little book. It's great.
I think that's really interesting. I remember thinking that in terms of faith and religion, and how different religions have different expectations of how you should grieve.
Definitely.
And, you know, in Victorian society, women wore black, and they wore it for a year or however long. Yeah. And then you were expected you had 12 months to grieve, and then you were supposed to get over it, apart from Queen Victoria, who then wore black for the rest of her life, kind of said no. And I think it's the same with, you know, the Muslim religion, that you have a period of grief and then you come back out into society. And and I think it's probably in a way safe to have that structure. Because during that time, there's no expectation. My grief is as strong in the loss of my daughter as today as it was in 2019.
Absolutely.
And that will never dissipate. It will be there forever. So yes, you cope with it differently and you carry it differently, but it doesn't go away. We shouldn't be judgmental on anyone's grief.
It's such a good point. I think you're right. Like, as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, these sorts of customs or rituals or processes, yeah, it strikes me that they're good for the practicality maybe side of things. Like, this is what we do, this is how we handle it, and the time frames are interesting. Some of the examples in the book are like, things have to happen within days. When I think about complex grief and I think about complex death as well, sometimes those processes do not move at the same pace as what a culture or a religion may want. I can just see in that problems, particularly in terms of suicide death, which often takes a little bit of time for our professional worlds to move through. And yeah, I can see it also causing more problems, more grief at the same time. But I guess you hold on to that, perhaps these ways are injecting that hopeful bit that we know is so important for people. It's like, well, yes, maybe that's how we're going to do this, and that's okay. That's how we're going to get through it. That's what we're going to do. That's the practical side of things. But I think you're absolutely right that grief doesn't just stop on a particular date. It's like you got a year. And yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it, to think it that way? But I think people do.
Yeah, and I know even in how we grieve, never mind the length of time we grieve for. I mean, I always talk about my own family situation where after we lost Kat, everyone, rather than pulling together, which I think this happens a lot, rather than pulling together as a family, we definitely fell apart in a lot of ways. So, my other daughter, Tash, was very much, I want to be alone. I don't want to see people. I don't want to, I don't want to talk about it. And whereas I was like, I want everyone around. I want as many people here as possible. I want to drink alcohol. I mean, I didn't become an alcoholic, thank God. I needed people around me.
In today's episode, I'm talking with Angela Allen, founder of Bags for Strife in the UK. After Angela lost several family and friends to suicide, she and a group of like-minded people. In today's episode, I'm talking with Angela Allen, founder of Bags for Strife in the UK. After Angela lost several family and friends to suicide, she and a group of like-minded people banded together to create Bags for Strife. This charity distributes care packs to people bereaved by suicide, with the aim of making people feel less isolated, more understood, and connected to others who've gone through what they're going through. Bags for Strife is the inspiration behind our After Bags project, which is distributing the same kind of bags here in Australia. This is an inspirational story about how wonderful things can be born out of terrible circumstances, and a reminder that simple acts of care and empathy can have massive positive impact. This episode does discuss suicide and complex grief, so please take care while listening.
Me.
Yeah.
My husband was very both really, in terms of wanting to be by himself, but also going to the pub.
Yeah.
And my two stepdaughters, again, so different. And it was tricky. I wish we'd kind of known about, the support circles of grief, that the person closest to you cannot be your support.
Yeah.
Or if they are, they then need a person on the next circle outwards to support them, who then needs. And I don't think we realised that. I don't think that Dave, certainly in terms of Damien and I, I don't know, we just didn't support each other. And that contributed hugely to his suicide the next year. I wish that I had been better in terms of supporting him, but I was so embroiled in my own loss that I couldn't see the needs of others. And that's where friends and family and support services should be better. They should be coming in and just providing that support.
It makes so much sense. What a situation as well. Like, I'm just hearing the story again and I'm just thinking, wow, like that's a really complicated situation. It's really complicated. But, when I'm working with people, teaching them about how to support other people, one of the things we have to talk about in that is, can you do that? Can you be that support? And unfortunately, I think sometimes when we're unwell, like going through a mental health problem, and that doesn't mean mental illness, it can just mean really sad, really stressed, really anxious, really worried, you know, whatever it might be, grieving, just good old fashioned grieving, you know. It can be that because of that experience, we're unable to see things that we might be able to see when we're not unwell. And so that means that we can't actually see things that are happening right in front of us. And that's not because we aren't good at that, or it's not because we haven't seen them. It's because we're also in that sort of red zone space where we need somebody outside of us sitting in the corner of the room looking down going, hey, you know, have you seen this? You know, have you noticed that? Can we bring that up to the surface level? But, you know, it's so hard to kind of reach out for that support as well, right? So how do you do that when you already are a bit depleted in that space of being able to advocate? And I think you're right. We have support services need to be in there telling us about that, saying, actually, you know what, just be careful of these things, or just know that this is how this works, or this might happen. But the second thing I think we really need is communities, whatever that is, whether that's a family or a beautiful town like you described, or the whole country or the whole world, whatever it might be, or workplaces, you know, sporting clubs and churches, and the list goes on. But I think we need communities that are skilled and alert, you know, that they can sort of spot these things, they know about these things before they're in it, so that they can actually help people who are in it while that support person is not. You know, that's actually what we need, and it's a big part of the work I do. But yeah, we need everything. We need all of those things. I think we need all of it. We need the bags, we need the people, we need the professionals, we need the friends, we need all those things around us. And boy, it can be hard to accept that, I think, sometimes too.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. I mean, I think I've said to you before, even if I'd kept that card, you know, even if I knew what was on that card. And I remember actually the police, they complete a form. It's called the G72 form in England. And they go through kind of the family's experience. And right at the end, the question is, do you want support? And I mean, this was probably within 24 hours of losing Kat. And I was like, no. But because your head's all over the place.
Yeah.
And actually, it's the wrong time to ask, but two, we are trying to get them to change the G72 form to have a opt out rather than an opt in, because so many people say no in that initial few days, and actually it's only maybe weeks or months or even years later you go, oh, really do need support.
Yeah.
So we're trying to, I think it's the coroner's offices here and the police that we need to kind of change the mindset of. And actually they're coming round to that. They are recognizing that, yeah, it's a simple change on a form, but actually it could make a big difference to people.
Make a massive difference. Yeah, massive difference, particularly that in that complex traumatic kind of grief, you know, like people are not thinking clearly. I mean, I know you know this, but people aren't thinking clearly about that stuff. And I think as well, like, as I think about this too, when we think about suicide and mental health and all those sorts of things, it still unfortunately has a big whack of stigma around it, right? So, you know, are people actually going to say, yeah, I need support with this really stigmatizing thing? Probably not. Like, even if they're kind of in good mind at that time, you know, maybe that stigma is still going to make them go, no, I don't need that. But yeah, just all the things we know, right? The things we know, and dealing with systems that are probably built before we knew these things and trying to change it, you know, that's a hard work. But I think it makes sense, right? Opt out if you want to, or, you know, we're going to call you in 2 weeks' time and you can tell us if you want what you want then, and you can call us between now and then if you need to. It would be so useful. Yeah, it makes sense. Well, I wish you the best of luck getting that changed. It would make so much sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they do it. I can't remember, it's one of those Scandinavian countries, it might be Norway, where if there is a loss by suicide, somebody turns up on the doorstep, they've got a backpack, and literally people don't have an option.
Yeah, okay.
But you have that person standing at your door saying, I am here to help you. And if the family said, I don't want it, that person comes back. They leave the bag, obviously, with them, and they'll come back repeatedly. Why does every country not have somebody with a backpack or a bag turning up on the doorstep?
That's incredible. That's really amazing. It fits with that sort of Scandinavian sort of social safety net thing that we hear so much about, doesn't it? It's kind of like, yep, that's how that works. They're different. Yeah. I'm in Australia, you're in the UK. I think people have a bit of an idea in their head about the kind of culture of the UK and the sort of stiff upper lip and the kind of, what we talk about, what we don't talk about. How much does that translate into daily, like the reality of this stuff? Is it a part of the challenge that you've got in the UK? Stereotype may not exist, right? But if we think about it, I'll tell you the reason I ask is because when I tell people what's in your bag, when I do training, I say, these are the things in the bag. And I say, there's tea bags in there. People say, well, of course there's tea bags in there. It's British, And you kind of go, well, yeah, actually, that's interesting. But it's obviously reflecting something that people hold to be true about the UK or about Brits, And so I'm curious about it. How does the general culture help or not help this sort of quest that you're on to reduce the stigma?
Yeah, really interesting question. It's that stoicism, isn't it? That's
a good word.
stoicism. And I've got to say here, I'm Irish, so we don't have that. We talk to everyone and we talk a lot and we ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Scottish, Welsh, very different, like really different cultures, aren't they, across the Suicide, it has been part of my language even before I lost Kat and Damien, and that's because of the work that I did. So, I knew about it, we talked about it. But actually, and now, I'm completely embedded in it.
Yeah.
I find if I talk to other people, they're like, oh, what? You want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Or they're just not aware of, say, this awful statistics around suicide and all of the conversations that we would have normally with people.
Yeah.
I actually am shocked by the fact that some people just don't know about it. And I think, God, aren't you the lucky ones that suicide is obviously not been in your world? You're very lucky because statistically, it's almost 1 million people. The Samaritans here have said that for every life lost to suicide, 130 people are affected. And I think maybe that's an international statistic. And that means that almost 1 million people a year in England are affected in some way. I don't understand why suicide is still not discussed. You don't want to talk about it over breakfast every day, but I just think, and I do worry that I maybe over talk about it, that, you're sitting around on a girls' night having your crisps and dips and I'm bringing suicide into the conversation again. And I have to check myself with that.
Yeah.
But it is such a big part of my life. My life has completely been changed by suicide. So, so it's part of me now. I think there is still that stoicism. There is still that stigma, but there's an awful lot of work being done to break that down. And it's talked about a lot on BBC. There's a lot of coverage. I think the laws just recently changed so that suicide will be talked about in schools, starting in primary schools.
Yeah.
So definitely there's been a huge drive across the country to overcome stigma and everything that's associated with loss through suicide.
That makes so much. Well, it's good to hear that that's the case. Yeah. I think, that sort of story about that ripple around a suicide death, the 130, 140, and, what that looks like here in Australia. The number's about 3,500 people a year take their own life in Australia. And, when we do the maths of that, it's about 9 people a day. And if we do sort of 3,500 times 130, 140, it ends up being about just short of 500,000 people every year. And then I say to them, well, this doesn't include people who have attempted suicide but not died. And it also doesn't include people who've had the thought and ideation and the people connected to them. So I'm sure, I don't know what those numbers are, but I think we quickly go from 500,000 to maybe 1.5 million people. And then I think, in Australia, we have 26 million people in our country, 1.5 million people in 26 million people. I just don't think we'd have to go too far into our networks or, when we talk to people, I just don't think we'd have to go too far to meet one of those people who's dealt with this in some way in the last 12 months. And then I think, do I hear about that enough? Do I hear about that if I think about something else like maybe a physical health issue that affects the same number of people, do I hear about that? And I'm sure that I do, and so it's a bit like, well, why aren't we doing that? And it's got to be things like stigma and worry and shame and all these things that we know about, right, that are sort of a bit outdated in terms of they're a bit myths, you know, they're myths. But I think it does start with people that, like, I'm thinking about you're out with your girlfriends and, you know, having drinks and dips and stuff. And I think it kind of starts there, you know, if people feel comfortable to talk about it, or they just hear someone talking about it confidently, it can inspire that confidence in them to kind of go, well, it is all right to talk about it. I think support starts there in a lot of ways. So it's something you can do, right? It's something that you can do. It's an action you can take in this tsunami wave of stuff where you think, gee, what can I do? You know, what can I possibly do? Yeah, it's interesting. I think here the culture, although I would say Australians get this kind of rap of a culture that's very laid back and, you know, we're all chilled out and at the beach all the time. We don't talk about this stuff. We don't do it to the extent of the challenge, and we certainly don't talk about it to the extent of the grief impact that it has, I don't think. So, and I'm convinced of that when I stand in front of people and we train people about it. Every course, 2 or 3 people will say, yep, I've been through that, you know. It's like, okay, you know, so why aren't we talking about it? And they don't even know. They're like, I'm not sure. So there's still something there to do, isn't there? But I think practical things like the bags makes so much sense. It allows people to talk about it.
Absolutely. The other thing is that figure of 130 people, I think that's a complete underestimation.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at a death, there was a death of a young girl just in the local town, and she was only 13 and she took her own life a couple of weeks ago.
So,
the school community has been devastated. You know, you've got 500 kids at that school, and yes, not all of them were her best friend, obviously.
Yeah.
But when you're in a community, a school community, you are affected by that. Definitely. And I go back to the loss of Kat when she had travelled. She'd done a lot of travelling, so she spent a lot of time in Australia. And so she had loads of friends over there who couldn't come over to say goodbye to her. So all of those people are affected. And that doesn't even count into the 600 people or so that were actually at her funeral and those that went there. So I think with young people especially, you could triple that amount and still not be close to the amount of people affected. Absolutely. I think we need to reconsider that really and just say it's a very underestimation.
I think it's a bare minimum situation. It might be the average, but I think it's the bare minimum, you know, the bare minimum, particularly when you think about people who, when we start thinking about trauma and being traumatized, like, you know, people can be traumatized about anything. So there's this idea that, you know, oh, they're not, but they weren't as closely connected to this person as maybe person A was. And so maybe they're a little bit safer from that. But it's like, well, actually, that's not how trauma works. So, you know, like, that's not how that works. It's just not. So, you know, I think it's probably much more than 130 in a practical sense, you know, and we need to kind of consider that, I think, in our approaches. It's just, keep in mind the scope of the challenge, right? The scope of the challenge. I sort of say to people when I deliver the training, I'm like, if I want to send a bag, let's say that for every person that loses their life to a suicide, let's say there's 5 people that should get a bag. You know, that's 45 bags a day I need to send, you know, and it's just, when you think about it like that, you kind of go, oh, wow. It's a different way to think about it. And it's very practical. And I think it's possibly one of the best ways into that conversation, you know, to say, here's what we do, here's how we support people, here's the scope of it. And it allows people to kind of go, oh, right, okay, I didn't realize that. You know, it's interesting. In our previous conversations, we've talked about prevalence and rates, and it's similar for the population size, I think, is where we got to. It's a universal experience, isn't it? It's a health experience. So wherever humans exist, this risk exists. And we should think about it that way a lot of the time.
And also that, I don't know why you're an expert on this one. Why do they call it disenfranchised grief? Because I think that's an awful expression that means nothing to people who have disenfranchised grief.
Yeah, it is a strange thing.
Technical term. I think what we're doing with After Bags and with us is recognizing that your grief is as important, significant, you know, as anyone else's. It doesn't matter that you weren't their mother, their father, their husband, their wife. You were a friend. You knew them. You were a colleague, you were in their world in some way. So obviously you've got a right to grieve.
100%. I don't know why we call it that. I think it's partly because as humans, we like to have a box to put things in. We're like, yep, that's what that is. And it kind of allows, in our service system here anyway, like diagnosis allows, for example, access to things. And if you don't have a diagnosis, you can't have access. And like it's kind of tied into that thinking method, I think, in a lot of ways. But I think actually, as you're talking, it makes me wonder if maybe the right way to kind of talk about suicide loss and suicide grief is to say, well, actually, the conversation needs to be around grief and how grief works, because grief is the umbrella experience and everyone's grief is different. A suicide grief is different to a grieving a pet, for example, grieving a pet or grieving a job loss or a relationship breakdown, like whatever it might be. So let's talk about grief and how that shows up, because it reminds me of like, the reason I'm thinking about that is earlier in the year, one of the clients that I've worked with, I've taught their team mental health first aid, and one of their team lost their partner to suicide. And they asked me to come in and talk to them about like, what do we do when this person comes back to the office? What do we do? How do we handle this? What should we say? What shouldn't we say? All these things. And I thought, kudos to you to realize that that's happening, that's happening in your team. That's amazing, number one. So even like, I'm confident just hearing that is going to be fine, because you've got that awareness. But number two, it is grief. And when we sat around the table and we talked with that person's team about what they were worried about, it became really clear that they were just all grieving as well. They were grieving that their colleague was grieving. They were having a grief response to this thing that, particularly with that workplace lens on it, people would say, but this is a colleague of yours, but actually this is someone I work with. I see them 5 days a week. Maybe they hired me. Maybe I hired them. There's strands to that relationship that transmit that grief, right? And if we think that doesn't happen, then I don't know where we're going with that. I just don't think that works. So maybe the conversation has to be about how grieving works and how impactful that is, both physically and mentally and emotionally. I think that's part of the skill set we need to develop, is how do we do grief?
Yeah, completely. And gosh, you just make me think of loads of conversations that I've had over the time where I don't, that physicality of grief as well, how it can, I didn't realize that grief could make you feel so ill, or it could hurt physically, actually hurt. And I don't think people do know that.
I don't think they do.
I do think we need to be educated better, but I suppose there's a fine line of going, this is the worst you're ever going to feel in your whole life. As a 6-year-old, you're going, oh my God.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, crafting, when you said before that the things are changing so that primary school kids will learn about this stuff, I think that's incredible. And of course, this is the other thing I hear sometimes is people go, oh, we shouldn't talk about that like that with that group of people. It's like, well, no one is doing that. No one is going into a primary school and saying, people take their own lives. They're not being really blunt about it. They're adapting that message to be appropriate. And that's what we should do. And that's kind of what we've been talking about for the last little while, is like, well, how do we show up for people? How do we meet them where they are? And of course, we're going to do that differently with a primary school student than we are with an adult. And as I say that, I've met lots of young teenagers who would do this a lot better because they've been taught and shown and educated about mental health and emotional health and well-being and things. They might do that a lot better than I would as a 46-year-old. I didn't have that. So, I think there's change coming. There's sort of change coming, but we want it to be faster. But yeah, I think it'll come. I think it'll sort of end up being, we talk about this. This is what we do. And maybe they don't have all the detail, all the fine-tuned, knowledge about it, but they've got the basics down. They go, I'm grieving. Like, go away. I'm grieving. I can't wait for that moment to happen, for someone to say, you know what? No, I'm going through grief. Go away. It's just, it makes sense to me. You're
doing a bit of work here as well about that workplace loss, and also about kind of in terms of bereavement leave. I think they're trying to change legislation here as well around that with loss, particularly loss through suicide, actually. But it's interesting going back. I was thinking about I went back into Kat's school to do, one of my friends had donated a prize, which was awarded in Kat's name for kindness and compassion. She was so kind. And so the first year we went in to present the prize, we spoke to the head teacher and she said, yeah, I said, what would you like us to talk about? And she said, well, please talk about Kat. And you can obviously talk about that she isn't here anymore, but don't talk about the charity and don't talk about how she died. And it was like, right, so you want us to talk about her. Kat went to the school and then she died, is basically the story that I was going in with. It was because, you know, she wanted to protect the school from talking about suicide. I'm sorry, but those kids have heard about it.
Yeah.
Some people have been affected by it. Why would you not want to say that word?
It's such a typical response, I think, unfortunately, isn't it? They go, we don't want to talk about it. And it flags to me that it's not just schools. I think there's lots of environments that would have the same sort of reaction. It's like this big screaming red flag that actually that environment needs to learn about this stuff. Like you actually need to understand it. And protecting those young people from suicide is very much about talking about suicide with them as a concept, not as an act, but as a concept and a thing that happens and a state that people can be in. And within that, a very empowered skill set where we can actually get involved and help people and stop it. You know, safety and suicide involves talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, I do understand where they're coming from. Like it's well intentioned, but I think the impact is not great. The impact's not great. A big theme for me this year in my sort of teaching and mental health stuff is good intention is good. Like we want people to have good intentions. We want people to have well-intentioned conversation, but you also have to measure the impact of that conversation too. And both of them need to kind of line up. And if you only want to get one, go for impact, go for positive impact. That's what you should measure, because intention, you can have the nicest intention, but actually that means that we don't give them the opportunity to learn safe, or we don't give them the opportunity to say, you know, in that situation, I can feel myself getting on a high horse here, Angela. We don't give them that opportunity to say, oh, my friend yesterday told me that they were thinking about that. What should I do? I understand where people come from. And it's a tough one. It's a really difficult one to crack, particularly in a school setting. I think the schools are trying to keep so many people happy. And, you know, what an impossible task just in general. But it doesn't make sense. And like you said several times today, young people already know about it. If their friend says, I'm thinking about doing this, they're online, they're Googling it, they're finding out anyway. And we're sitting there going, no, we won't talk about it. It baffles me, but it doesn't at the same time. It frustrates me is what it is. Yeah.
Have
Interesting.
you dismounted from that high horse now?
I have. Yeah, I can. I can easily get on it, and I've learned how to get off it as well. Yeah. I mean, I think it's that emotion, that passion, that emotion is tied to the work that we do, isn't it? Like it is tied to that work that we do. And it's from experience, I suppose, too, but it's also from knowledge and skill and understanding and all of these things that we are quite maybe lucky/unlucky to have, right? But we hold that power in that knowledge. And how do we translate that into action? I think the bags are just such a beautiful example of how you do that. You know, that's a nice way to do it, but there's so much else you can do. Yeah, I've got a lot of faith in young people learning about this stuff because they have the tools. I was teaching a bunch of high school students a couple of months ago out in the country. And I said, guys, you know, where do you learn about this stuff? And they said, oh, well, you just Google it. And one of them said to me, oh, how did you learn about it when you're in high school? I said, okay, let me take you back. If I went to the library, I'd go to the library and I would say to the librarian, oh, can I get that encyclopedia on CD-ROM? I'd have to book a computer. I'd have to put the CD in the computer. I'd have to hope that CD had the information on it that I wanted. And they're looking at me as if I'm from outer space, you know? And I'm like, well, that's how life was. It's hopeful to me that they have access to this information, but it needs to be guided. It needs to be informed. It needs to have context around it, I think, which is where skill and experience and lived experience is such an important part of that story, I think. Yeah.
Was this a perfect segue into me now talking about our next steps in developing the bags for young people?
Yeah, please go for it. I'd love to hear about that. Absolutely. I suppose, like we've mentioned in the conversation, the bags. So just very quickly, my friend now started a client, Catherine Epson here in Australia. She was the lucky recipient of one of your bags when her dad passed, and her mum got a bag as well. And she brought that to me, and we did mental health first aid training with the team. And she said, "Does this bag exist?" And I'm telling the abridged version here for our listeners, but the answer was no, it doesn't. And so we worked for a year and a bit to kind of create it. And we worked with you to kind of learn about how you did your bags, and our bags very much mirror yours. You've been so generous with your help and support around that. But the Australian version of Bags for Strife is After Bags Australia, and they exist now. So yes, that's why we're talking, that's how this connection happened. It's been beautiful. It's been a really lovely working relationship with you and Halani and the rest of the team too. When you say bags for young people, we get their request all the time. We'll present our bag and they'll say, "Oh, is there a version for this? Is there a version for this community? Is there a version for that one?" And I would love to just be able to do versions for everyone. But young people has been on the list, for us. So yeah, young bags for Strife.
Well, it's not, we haven't done it yet. We're just in its development. So as you say, Nick, we have had so many requests from families or schools of young people who have lost young people and young people who have been affected by suicide through the loss of a family member or whomever. I think we've been talking about it for a long time. And this year we got some additional money from a philanthropist who basically said, yeah, we want to support this. Amazing. So I'm talking to lots of different charities who work with young people to get them to have those conversations with young people. So bring along one of our bags and asking them what do they think of the current contents, how relevant are they, and what would they put in there instead. So they'll be curated, designed by the young people. Awesome. And eventually we will have a journal for the young people that's designed by them and a little book of help for the young people that is designed by them. But at the moment, we're just concentrating on the items themselves. And I don't know if it's strangely or whether I should have been surprised, but a lot of the items really resonate with them anyway. There aren't that many things that they want to change. So as I say, they would change slightly the journal. They would change slightly the little book of help. The tea bag, they said, nope, we want hot chocolate or, something else. The anger bowl. So in there is the anger bowl, which represents one of the emotions that we talked about at the beginning. And they wanted that. They wanted a fidget toy. Which, again, they wanted the water bottle because they recognize that. The tissues, obviously. Yeah. Even the lip balm and the sleep spray because they represent different things. Yeah. A candle. So basically maybe a battery operated one, like the one that you've got actually in your after bags, a battery operated one rather than the one that we put in. Yeah. And I think maybe they wanted some kind of small cuddly toy thing, just a towel they could hold in. But actually, we haven't heard from that many. We've maybe only heard from 20 young people so far. But I'm quite surprised that they haven't just gone, well, what they've done is, no, we get that and we understand why it's in there. And actually, all of those things resonate. So hopefully, I'm hoping by maybe the end of this year, certainly into early next year, that those bags will be ready to be given out.
So exciting. Yeah. Like blame, anger, guilt, sadness. It's like, well, how those items are in there because they directly address these things. And maybe where there's a little young person tweak, it's because, like the tea bags and stuff like that, tea bags, hot chocolate, that's a thing. And so they're just adjusting. It's because those items do so tightly support the emotions that you set out to support when you created the bags in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it doesn't matter. Grief, we've talked about how grief is different, but actually an awful lot of the emotions that you face are not to do with age or generation. Young people will feel all of the things that their parents, their grandparents, the older generations will feel as well. Yeah. And so I suppose even recognizing that is a start, isn't it?
Definitely. I think it just fits in with that conversation we were having before, that they know about this stuff, they've experienced it, or they've heard about it, or they've read about it, or something like that. They might not have the right sort of knowledge and toolkit, but with a little support, to fill in those bits that an adult brain can do differently. They can do all the things we need them to do or we want them to do. We just have to be there to support and facilitate that process for them. They can do whatever they need to do to support each other. And that might be access or, money or tools or knowledge or whatever it might be. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me, I guess, when I think about it, that they would like the items in there, to go, yeah, they are nice items. They are good things. And the fidget stuff makes sense to me as well. I think Angela,
I mean, we're, really want to get at lunch as soon as possible. I think with both of the after bags, with our bags and with the young person's bags, some of it is just the recognition. It almost doesn't matter what's in there. It's actually just we recognize your loss.
Yeah.
And we know that your loss is equal to everyone else's. And here's a bag that proves that. Yeah. And I think for young people, that is really important as well.
Definitely.
That we're acknowledging it and we recognize how much this is affecting you and we want to help in some way.
I think young people often feel like they don't have a lot of control in their world, like if they're still in high school, for example, or younger, they don't have that autonomy. They can't for a lot of reasons, but they still feel urged to support or do all that sort of stuff, but they don't have that autonomy to actually do it. So it's like, well, here's a way that you can. Here's an easy way that you can. We've done it for you. You just have to push the button. You just have to go, yep, that's what I want. And that's how I'm going to do it. Like, they just need that little bit of extra support to bridge the gaps that are just kind of woven into the way that the world's built, right? Like the world's not built for young people really. And it's frustrating for them. They know that. They know that. We know that. So it's like building that bridge makes sense. So to have the bag and to kind of show them that's how you can do it. And these are the things that exist. And a lot of the things we talked about tonight still come back for me to this idea of hope, right? This idea of like, yeah, that's hopeful. Things can happen and we hope it never does happen. But when things do happen, we have a way to kind of help people feel hopeful that they'll move through whatever they're going through and in a way that's evidence-based and empathetic and caring and all the things that we started our conversation talking about, that's what the bags are designed to do. Yeah. Sometimes I think about I don't quite know how to explain it, but I think, I often sit in front of people and show them the bag and they say, oh, that's such a good idea. That's such a good idea. And I think to myself, well, it is literally just a bunch of things that we've identified are useful. There's nothing really stopping you from buying similar things, and giving them to a person. So, I'm so glad that we've put the effort in and you've put your effort into your bags and we've done the same thing here. But it can feel a little bit, it's not frustrating. It's sort of like, yeah, why aren't we? And I think it's just people need that little bit of help, like just a little bit of support. Like we've done it, just here. It's okay. You don't have to think about it. It's fine. It feels a little bit like when I teach mental health first aid skills, I finish 2 days of training. I say, great. I hope you never have to use anything I've taught you these 2 days. And it's strange, isn't it? But they're all like, no, it's been so useful. It's going to be so good. And it's like, well, yeah, it's that chicken egg thing in a way, I think it takes people to blaze the trail a little bit sometimes to say, you know what, these things exist. If it helps you, that's amazing. That's what we're here for. If it sparks a conversation, awesome. And if that creates, safer communities, more alert communities, then even better, even better.
I think it's so right. I mean, people don't know what to say, whether it's stigma, whether it's just grief or whatever. You have that walking into the supermarket and people will they won't come up to you because they don't know what to say. Yeah. And it's actually just come over and acknowledge that person. Yeah. There is nothing that you can say that's going to make anything worse because the worst possible thing that could happen has happened. Whatever you say is not going to make it more worse. Complex. Yeah. And I think that bag, I think more people should actually read. We've got the little book, and I think more people should read that because there is anybody can be there for their friend in whatever capacity, and whether that's just coming round, making food, making the cup of tea, which is why we put the tea bag in there. You don't need to be a counsellor. You don't need to be somebody that's an expert in psychotherapy to know what to do to support someone. What you need to be is a good friend, and that's as much as it is.
Yeah, that's so well said. A lot of people that I speak with, they'll say, yep, I want you to say hello to me. I want you to reach out to me, but I don't expect anything from you. I think the person who's holding back from saying hello or reaching out, a lot of the time they're worried about, oh, well, if the person says something, I don't know how to respond, like that's going to be a problem. But it's actually like, no, that person doesn't expect you to have all these magic answers and be a psychotherapist, be a counselor, be a grief worker. They don't expect that. But also, they notice you not making the approach. And that's got to be tricky. You know, just by saying hello or even saying, hi, I don't know what to say, but I just want to say hello.
Exactly.
I've got no idea what I should do, but hello. Like, what an icebreaker. It's an easy, well, I say it's easy, but that would be useful for people because I don't think people really expect the world when we reach out for support. They really don't. And hopefully, as we've talked about, by that stage, they'll have supports around them, ideally. They don't need that from us. They just need friendship. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you see my sweatshirt, Nick?
Yeah, hugs help. I love your 2 sweatshirts. Hugs help.
And if you don't have the right words, just give somebody a hug. I mean, obviously, maybe not in an inappropriate fashion with a stranger, because that would be weird, but certainly with your friends and your colleagues.
Absolutely. Yeah, or even just saying, you know, I spend a lot of my time working in workplaces and teaching workplaces how to do it. And they spend a lot of time dancing around the like, oh, what's appropriate at work? I'm like, well, actually, what's appropriate between you and that person? You know, that's kind of what it is. It's not about the building you're in. So, you know, even saying to someone, oh, I really feel like I want to give you a hug, but I know that wouldn't be right. Just saying something like that can convey, oh, like that's the empathy. It's like, oh, I feel like I want to give you a hug, but I feel like it might be weird, you know. Everyone says, nah, bring it in, give me a hug. It's like, give them a hug, you know, like, but just telling them what you're thinking, I think can be good to kind of go, well, yeah, I really want to give you a hug, or I really wanted to like do something for you, I didn't know what to do, or, you know, I wanted to say hello, I wasn't sure if I should. It just tells them that about them and caring. Yeah, there's so much communicated in that. And I love the hugs can help the idea. It's really nice. Yeah. Oh, Angela, it's been such a good conversation. We could talk for hours about this stuff. Maybe we should get together again and do another chat. Look, from me, and I know Catherine was really excited that you and I are catching up. We just want to say a big thanks for being so generous with your thinkings and learnings and for having started the bags that you have in the first place, because without that, they wouldn't exist here in Australia. And we're so proud to tell your story whenever I introduce it to people here, and people love hearing the story. They really love it. And none of that would have happened without you and your crew, your little bubble of community reacting the way that you did so many years ago. It's just, it's our deep, deep thanks. It's just, incredible what you do.
You are very welcome. We're just really happy that, you know, that support is, it's not just in the UK, it's not just in Australia, it's all over the world. And why would everyone should have the support that they need when they need it and for as long as they need it for. And that's what we're both trying to do. And I'm really looking forward to coming over to Melbourne at some point.
Oh yeah, the invitation's open. Come whenever you like, you know, absolutely. And next time I'm over your way, we'll catch up too. And here's to a long lasting relationship, sending bags where they need to go, wherever they might end up in the world, hey?